Jonathan Carter had everything: money, power, and a name that carried weight in high society. But there was one thing he lacked: an heir. After years of failed relationships and a bitter divorce, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He offered his maid, Elena, a life-changing sum of money to carry his child. She was hesitant at first, but with her family struggling back home, she agreed. It was supposed to be a simple arrangement. No emotions, no complications, just a business deal. 9 months passed, and the day finally came. The hospital room was filled with anticipation as the doctor handed Jonathan his newborn son. But the moment he looked into the baby's eyes, his heart stopped. Something was wrong. The child didn't look like him. His mind raced as he glanced at Elena, whose expression shifted from exhaustion to unease. The room grew heavy with silence. Jonathan's grip tightened on the blanket wrapped around the baby. This wasn't just a bad feeling. He knew something wasn't right. His chest tightened with questions he wasn't ready to ask. Had he been betrayed? Was the child even his? Elena looked away, tears welling in her eyes. Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a word, the doctor cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "there's something you need to know about the baby." Jonathan's stomach dropped. He wasn't ready for what came next. Jonathan felt his pulse pounding in his ears. As he waited for the doctor to continue, the air in the hospital room was thick with tension, and every second stretched unbearably long. Elena's eyes darted between him and the doctor, her fingers gripping the edge of the hospital bed, as if bracing for impact. The doctor hesitated before speaking again. "Mr. Carter, your son. He has a rare genetic trait that doesn't match your DNA." Jonathan's breath caught. His fingers stiffened around the baby's tiny form. He wasn't a medical expert, but he knew exactly what that meant. This child wasn't his. Elena let out a quiet sob, turning her face away. Jonathan stared at her, his mind reeling. He had handpicked the best doctors, ensured every step of the process was controlled. How could this have happened? He had trusted her. The betrayal stung deeper than he wanted to admit. His voice came out lower than he intended. "Elena, tell me the truth." Tears slipped down her face, and for a moment she didn't speak. But then, in a voice barely above, a whisper, she finally broke. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Jonathan. I swear." His jaw clenched. "Then explain." "Because right now, I don't know what to believe." She swallowed hard, her breathing uneven. "It was a mistake. A night I wish I could take back." Jonathan's world tilted as possibilities flooded his mind. Another man, someone he didn't know. Or worse, someone he did. His grip tightened on the baby, but the child let out a soft noise, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Jonathan exhaled sharply, his frustration boiling over. He had built his life on control, on making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. But now, everything was unraveling. Before he could say another word, the door swung open. A nurse stepped in, looking between them with concern. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" Jonathan forced himself to breathe. No, nothing was all right. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He looked down at the baby, innocent, unaware. No matter what, this child was here now, and he needed answers. Turning back to Elena, his voice was cold, determined. "We're going to find out exactly what happened, and I hope, for your sake, you're telling the truth." Elena's lips trembled, but she nodded. Deep down, Jonathan knew the truth was going to change everything.
That night, as Daniel lay on the stiff mattress in the small cabin, he stared at the wooden ceiling, listening to the distant sound of crickets. It was nothing like the penthouse he was used to. No silk sheets, no city lights shining through. The windows, no hum of traffic. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing down on him. He told himself it was temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month at most, and then he'd have what he wanted. But the next morning, he got his first real taste of farm life. Emma woke him up at dawn, knocking on the cabin door with the force of someone who had no patience for laziness. "Hope, you're not expecting breakfast in bed," she said, tossing him a pair of worn-out gloves. "Get moving, there's work to do," Daniel groaned, rubbing his eyes as he pulled himself up. He wasn't used to waking up this early, and definitely not to do manual labor, but he forced himself to play the part. The next few days were brutal. Emma wasn't lying when she said she wouldn't go easy on him. She had him lifting heavy sacks of feed, repairing fences, cleaning out the barn, and working under the scorching sun until his muscles burned. He had never felt this kind of exhaustion before. By the end of each day, he could barely keep his eyes open. But what surprised him most was Emma herself. She wasn't just tough, she was relentless. She worked harder than anyone he had ever met, refusing to let exhaustion slow her down. But beneath all that strength, he could see the weight she carried. The way she stared out at the fields when she thought no one was looking. The quiet sighs. When she ran her fingers through the bills she kept tucked in a drawer. The way she pressed her lips together every time she had to make a difficult decision. She was fighting a battle, one she was too proud to admit she was losing. Daniel started to see the farm differently too. At first, it was just a piece of land, something to be bought and sold. But now, after spending days working on it, touching the soil, feeling the sun on his back, he started to understand why Emma refused to let it go. This land wasn't just property, it was history, memories, and years of hard work. And then there was Emma's younger brother, Jake. Jake was only 16, but had the responsibility of a grown man. He helped Emma with the farm as much as he could, but Daniel could see the frustration in his eyes. He wanted more. He wanted to go to college, see the world, do something different with his life. But with the farm struggling, he didn't have the heart to leave Emma alone. One evening, as Daniel sat on the front steps of the cabin, Jake joined him, kicking at the dirt with his boots. "You ever wanted to be somewhere else?" Jake asked, staring out at the fields. Daniel hesitated. "Yeah," he admitted. "All the time." Jake nodded. "Me too." He was quiet for a moment before he said, "Emma acts tough, but I know she's scared. She won't admit it, but if things don't turn around soon, we could lose everything." Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say, because that was exactly what he had planned. But the more time he spent here, the more conflicted he felt. He had never second-guessed a deal before, but this was different. This wasn't just business. It was someone's home, someone's dream. And for the first time in his life, Daniel started to wonder if making money was worth taking something so important from someone else. Then, things took a turn. A man showed up one afternoon, driving a sleek black car that looked out of place on the dirt road. Daniel watched from a distance as Emma met him near the front porch, her expression tense. The man was well-dressed, confident, and from the way he carried himself, Daniel knew exactly who he was. A developer. Someone just like him. Daniel moved closer, listening as the man spoke. "You're running out of options, Emma. The banks, breathing down your neck. You sell now, you walk away with something. Wait too long, and you'll walk away with nothing." Emma's jaw tightened. "I told you, I'm not selling." The man sighed, shaking his head. "Stubbornness won't save you. This farm isn't worth what you think it is. It's just land, dirt. You're fighting a losing battle." Daniel expected Emma to argue, to lash out, but instead, she just stood there, gripping her arms tightly, like she was holding herself together. And that's when it hit him. She was scared. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she could win this fight. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake in the cabin, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything. The deal, the farm, Emma. He had come here with a plan, to trick her, to manipulate the situation, to get what he wanted. But now, after seeing what she was up against, he wasn't so sure anymore. Because if he went through with this, he wouldn't just be taking a farm, he'd be taking everything Emma had left. And the worst part, he wasn't sure if he could live with that. The next morning, Daniel found Emma already out in the fields, her hands gripping the old wooden fence as she stared at the land stretched before her. The weight of yesterday's conversation with the developer still lingered in her expression. She looked lost in thought, her usual fire dimmed. Daniel hesitated before walking up beside her. "You okay?" he asked. Emma let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Do I look okay?" She shook her head and sighed. "Every day I tell myself I can fix this, that if I just work harder, if I just hold on a little longer, things will get better. But maybe I've been lying to myself." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had come here to take advantage of her desperation, to make her doubt herself just enough to push her into selling. And now, she was right where he had wanted her, tired, vulnerable, questioning everything. But instead of feeling triumphant, he felt sick. He looked at Emma, really looked at her. The dirt on her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes, the strength in her even as she stood there unsure of what to do next. This farm wasn't just some business deal, it was her home. It was her family's legacy, and he was about to take it away from her. Daniel turned away, clenching his fists. He had a choice to make. He could walk away with a deal that would make him even richer, or he could do something he had never done before, something that had nothing to do with money. That afternoon, he made his decision. Daniel drove into town and met with the bank that held Emma's debt. As a millionaire, he had connections, and, for the first time, he used them for something other than personal gain. He negotiated a deal, one that would give Emma more time to pay back what she owed without losing the farm. Then, he took it a step further. He secretly paid off a portion of her debt, making it easier for her to manage without even knowing someone had helped. When he returned to the farm, Emma was in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. She glanced at him as he walked in, raising an eyebrow. "Where'd you run off to?" Daniel hesitated. He could tell her the truth, but he knew Emma. She was proud, stubborn. If she found out he had helped, she might not accept it. So instead, he shrugged. "Just had to take care of something." Emma studied him for a moment, as if she could tell there was more he wasn't saying. But then, she simply nodded and went back to her work. Days passed, and Daniel found himself falling into the rhythm of farm life more easily than before. The work was still exhausting, but something had changed. He wasn't just here to play a role anymore. He was here because, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. Then, one evening, everything came to a head. The developer returned, this time with a contract in hand. He stood on Emma's porch, smirking as he held it out to her. "Last chance," he said. "Take the deal now or lose everything." Emma took the papers, her hands shaking slightly as she flipped through them. Daniel could see the doubt creeping into her expression. Before she could speak, he stepped forward. "She's not selling," he said firmly. The developer turned to him, confused. "And who are you?" Daniel glanced at Emma before taking a deep breath. It was time. He couldn't lie anymore. "Daniel Carter," he said. "I own Carter Enterprises." Emma's eyes widened in shock. "You... what?" The developer's smirk returned. "Ah, so you're here to make an offer yourself?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "No, I'm here to make sure you leave." The developer's expression darkened. "You don't get to make that decision." Daniel stepped closer. "Actually, I do. Because as of this morning, Emma's debts are no longer your concern." Emma gasped, turning to him. "What did you do?" Daniel finally looked at her, his voice softer now. "I did what I should have done from the beginning." The developer, realizing he had lost, scoffed and snatched the contract back. "You just threw away a fortune," he muttered before storming off. The silence that followed was heavy. Emma stared at Daniel, her emotions flickering between anger, confusion, and something else, something he couldn't quite place. You lied to me, she finally said. I did, he admitted. At first, I came here to get you to sell. I thought this was just another business deal. But then, I saw what this place means to you. I saw how hard you fight for it, and I realized I couldn't be the guy who took it away from you, Emma. Crossed her arms. And I'm just supposed to be okay with this? That you swooped in and fixed everything behind my back? Daniel sighed. I know you don't like accepting help, but this wasn't just about saving the farm. It was about doing the right thing. Emma was silent for a long time. Then, finally, she shook her head, a small, almost reluctant smile tugging at her lips. You really are something else, you know that? Daniel chuckled. I've been told. The tension eased, and for the first time in weeks, Emma didn't look weighed down by stress. Instead, she looked free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the farm, Daniel realized something. He had spent his whole life chasing money, believing success was about numbers and deals. But here, in this quiet, simple place, with people who worked hard and cared deeply, he had found something more valuable than anything he had ever owned. And for the first time in his life, he felt like a richer man, not because of what he had gained, but because of what he had given.